That's right. They think Christians are closed-minded, and they want to refer to themselves as free thinkers. And they're the ones who believe that their thoughts are 100% controlled by the laws of nature.
You know, as opposed to someone who thinks that their thoughts should be circumscribed by the dictates of a celestial tyrant whose punishment for dissent is eternal torment. If given the option, I know which one I'd pick. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here, and today we're addressing Once Forgiven, Now Free. He's got a few reasons that atheists aren't thinking clearly, but I'm not quite certain he's got it right. Have a look.
So I was thinking the other day, how much evidence would it take to convince an atheist?
See, here's the problem. It's less about how much evidence, and it's more about what kind. Somehow, religious people seem to think that what convinced them is what should convince everybody, and it's usually stuff like, just look at the complexity of the eye, or, we're here on Earth, aren't we? But they seem awfully reluctant to present the kind of evidence for the existence of a God that could be tested in a lab. But that's the kind of evidence it would take to convince me, and most of the atheists I know. Also, what is it with theists recording their videos in their damn car? So many of them do it. Is there something holy about recording in a Toyota? What's that about?
But by and large, a lot of atheists just aren't convinced. And I think we can get a good idea why by looking at the idea of free will.
No, I'm pretty sure the reason why is because your God never shows up in person.
See, according to atheists, we don't have a soul. We don't have an immaterial self that can transcend the natural world and act out of free will.
So already you've screwed up in two ways. First, when you say something like, according to atheists, you make it sound like atheists are one group with one way of thinking, almost a religion unto itself, like there was some sort of atheist instruction manual out there with dogma we're supposed to follow. But all it takes to be an atheist is for the number of gods you believe in to be 0. That's it. Everything else is extra. Second, atheists could believe in a soul. The concept of a soul is not solely the property of religion. An atheist could believe in almost anything supernatural, just so long as it's not a god. It seems unlikely given the culture in which we live, but it could happen.
In an atheistic worldview, everything's made of matter, and therefore everything is governed by natural law. And so human beings aren't free agents. We're actually just complicated biological robots, and we behave according to the laws of physics and chemistry. Everything is governed. Everything we do is governed by natural law.
I've never seen anybody provide sufficient evidence to refute this concept. Most of the arguments against it that I've heard amount to little more than bruised egos and hurt feelings. But if this is true, that means that my life has no purpose. It never seems to occur to them that it might just be tough noogies.
And so this is the materialistic, atheistic view of reality.
And now, finally, you're at least half right. What you're describing is materialism, but not atheism. Being convinced of one often leads to being convinced of the other, in either order, but they are not the same thing.
And if you think about it, it's really not that surprising that many scientists will come to the same conclusion, because a lot of them start with the assumption that everything's made of matter and everything must be explained by natural law.
Hold on a moment. What makes you think that? One of the basic tenets of science is objective thinking, being willing to explore ideas and accept conclusions that one finds personally unappealing, provided there's enough evidence. If most scientists do not reach the conclusion that the supernatural exists, it's because there isn't enough evidence in the universe to suppose so. And if there are supernatural forces, their influence would either be felt in this universe, or we'd never know they were there. This is why I said at the beginning of the video that it wasn't how much evidence it would take to convince an atheist, but what kind. We've seen no evidence of interaction between our universe and supernatural forces. If everything we've seen conforms to natural law when tested, then what reason do we have to suspect that the supernatural exists?
So if you try to find free will, you'll come to the conclusion that it has no material basis, and so they'll say, well, therefore it doesn't exist. And that's actually a logical fallacy. You can't use a system, you can't use science, which is used to study the natural world, in order to make conclusions about the supernatural world.
First, he claims that scientists start with the assumption that the material world is all that exists, but now he's starting with the assumption that a supernatural world exists. Is that hypocrisy or projection? Or both? Or all three?
Here's an analogy. If I said I have an invisible man in my house, and you came in and you looked everywhere, you looked under the couch, you looked in the closet, and you said, you know what, there is no invisible man in your house. I looked everywhere, and I couldn't find him. Now, of course, that'd be ridiculous. And while, that doesn't prove that there is an invisible man, it goes to show that looking for him isn't the right way to go about it.
Well, not if all we use is our eyes, no. But we could bring in, say, infrared, heat detectors, or sonar. We could set up cameras to see if something invisible starts shifting stuff around in your house. Or we could walk around waving our arms until we impact with something we can't see. Or something. But one way or another, if you're going to make this claim, you'd better be prepared to back it up with evidence, or we're fully justified in saying you're full of shit. And if you have evidence, then that means the invisible man has been making his presence known somehow, instead of just existing separate from everything else. Because again, if he hasn't been, then you're just making shit up.
And it's the same thing with free will. If we want to find something that transcends the natural world, that can act out of free will and that isn't controlled by natural physical law, you can't use an entity such as science that studies the natural world to determine whether or not it exists.
You'll note that he doesn't give an alternative method, and yet still claims that free will exists. And then he rolls right on as if nothing happened, which I suppose it did.
I was reading an article online in Psychology Today. It was written by, some PhD, and I just couldn't help but just shake my head at how stupid it was. Sorry to use that word, I don't know. It was just really dumb. I mean, he concludes that, as a matter of fact, that free will doesn't exist. And then here's a quote from the article. If free will is an illusion, what are the implications? How should we think or behave differently? Well, how can you talk about how we should live if we have no free will? If we have no free will, you can't use the word should. We should do this, we should do that. No, we have no choice. You just gave up that language when you decided that we have no free will.
First of all, decided? No. Concluded. That's actually a very important distinction. Like when people say that being gay is a choice. You don't decide either one. You come to the realization based on available data. But for an unimportant distinction, let's look at where you've focused on phrasing rather than meaning and context. Yes, he asked how we should behave differently, but it's clear to any honest person that what he was truly asking was how this new knowledge would affect things. Even if there is no free will, even if everything in the universe is predetermined according to the laws of physics and nature, that doesn't mean that we won't contemplate this new revelation, that we won't subjectively experience it and its consequences in ways that are, to us, unknown. And so, free will or no, the news that there is none will affect us in ways that we cannot yet foresee and which bear thinking upon, whether we can control that thinking or not.
Here's another atheist.
I love how these guys introduce atheists as if they're some sort of authorities, the way a pope or a rabbi might be. Like if they refute that atheist, they refute us all. Newsflash, it doesn't work that way. If one atheist is wrong about something or making the rest of us look bad, although some might be in agreement, the rest of us usually jump all over them as much as any theist might. Believe me, I've seen it from both sides.
Dr. William Provine from Cornell University. He says there are no gods, no purposes, no goal-directed forces of any kind. There is no life after death. When I die, I am absolutely certain that I'm going to be dead. That's the end for me. There is no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning to life, and no free will for humans either. No free will for humans either? Think about that. If there's no free will, how can he be sure about anything?
If there's no free will, how could he be anything but? It would be mandated by the deterministic universe that he come to this conclusion. Right or wrong, I might add. And given the available data, it seems a very reasonable conclusion to reach.
Well, if there's no free will, you didn't freely come to that conclusion.
You say that like it makes a difference. It still happened. Unless you're trying to say that a universe based solely on scientific principles cannot include beings which can think critically, which makes no sense. You yourself quoted from The Selfish Gene by Richard Dawkins, in which he described the way organisms strive to thrive and survive. Try saying that 3 times fast. The ability to think on a higher level beyond stimulus and response aids survival, an ability we've found the brain to have, no God and no soul required.
And so the great irony in all of this is that atheists want to call themselves free thinkers. That's right. They think Christians are closed-minded, and they want to refer to themselves as free thinkers. and they're the ones who believe that their thoughts are 100% controlled by the laws of nature.
No, the irony here is that you seem to be equating free thought with free will. Newsflash! They're not the same thing. A free thinker is someone who uses logic, reason, and empirical evidence in order to find truth, specifically in contrast to those who use authority, tradition, and dogma. Doesn't really seem to have a whole lot to do with your rant about free will versus determinism, does it? Next time you want to try making an argument, I recommend researching your subject matter first, kiddo.
But anyway, the point I wanted to make is to kind of try and figure out how much evidence would it take to convince an atheist that God exists, or of anything. And I think free will gives us a good idea. See, atheists will deny free will, even though that's pretty much the most obvious thing anyone could ever conclude.
Oh, really? Well, riddle me this. If you didn't have free will, how would you know? I'm afraid that common sense or intuition are not evidence. And you can't sneak up on the existence of God. If you want to prove he's real, you're going to have to be a lot more direct. Your evidence is going to have to be a lot less circumstantial. Like I've been saying, it's not how much evidence, it's what kind.
And when you point out, well, yeah, of course, we have free will, we make choices every day, then they'll just say, oh, it's an illusion. But of course, how can you argue with someone like that? If you think that your perception of reality is an illusion, then doesn't that mean that your beliefs about reality are also an illusion?
Now, wait a minute. You just jumped from making choices being an illusion to perception of reality being an illusion. And you cannot equate taking deliberate action with perception, making a choice with receiving information. And are you saying that beliefs are choices and not conclusions reached through the processing of sensory data filtered through subjective personal bias? The entire premise of your question seems off-kilter at best.
I mean, where does this end? You have to realize that this belief undermines knowledge. That's why atheism is just a logically inconsistent worldview. It doesn't stand up to it can't even stand up by itself. It's on sinking sand. It has no foundation for a list of things, including morality and ethics and free will and knowledge and science itself.
As opposed to religion, whose basis rests on the existence of an invisible magical man up in the sky. That makes tons more sense. At least atheism fits the available data. You claim that atheism cannot account for free will, yet you fail to prove its existence beyond the hand-waving because it just makes sense stage. And you begin with the presupposition that it must exist. And atheism only has no basis for an objective morality that has been handed down by an authority, which, by the way, is a contradiction in terms. Yet that seems to be the only kind theists are ever willing to discuss. Again, your premise comes down to little more than a because it just feels right to me diatribe rather than anything you can actually back up.
And so what it comes down to is you can provide an atheist with any evidence you want, but at the end of the day, if they don't want to believe, they will deny it. They'll just say, well, that's just an illusion.
And then we'll give you reasons why, which is the inconvenient part you'd like to ignore. It sounds to me as if you'd like to take not agreeing with your claims as outright baseless rejection of them. And that's simply not the case.
And there's actually a very good quote I found that explains this very well. Here it is. It's by the evolutionary biologist and geneticist Richard Lewontin. He says, "Our willingness to accept scientific claims that are against common sense is the key to an understanding of the real struggles between science and the supernatural. We take the side of science in spite of the patent absurdity of some of its constructs." And he explains why. Because we have a prior commitment, a commitment to materialism. Moreover, that materialism is absolute, for we cannot allow a divine foot in the door.
And this is the part where he takes what's said by that Lewontin guy to be representative of the attitude of every atheist. But if you remember the definition of a free thinker, it's someone who does not take truth from authority. I have no idea who this Lewontin guy is, but I do not agree with his premise. If you can show me the existence of the supernatural, be it divine or Lord of the Rings style magic, I'm prepared to consider it objectively. But it has to be evidence that I can experiment on, that I can test. Otherwise, on what basis do I make any kind of reasonable conclusion? I've said it before, I'll say it again. It's not how much evidence, it's what kind.
So why don't atheists believe in free will? Because it opens the door.
Like I said, he's reasoning from 1 to infinity. One atheist said it, therefore they all believe it. Pathetic.
And I think that's what it comes down to. Some people would rather deny their first-hand experience of reality than to acknowledge the existence of God.
And that's what it always comes down to, isn't it? That atheists have some sort of lame, illogical, because I just don't want a reason for not believing. It can't ever be that the claim doesn't fit the data. No. But it works both ways, doesn't it? Most theists would rather deny logic, reason, and evidence because it opens the door to their God possibly not existing. But at least one of these views is based on more than just personal feelings and experiences. And that, more than anything else, is the reason why I'm an atheist instead of a theist. Until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please, think. If you don't like what I'm saying, there's a good chance you're the reason I'm saying it.